welcome back, everybody. This is our second attempt at the Church of the Harvest Family Ministries podcast, and so I hope this finds you well within a very busy season. As always, I am joined by the amazing, life-changing Cynthia Lewis, our children's director here at Church of the Harvest. And I also have an additional individual with us today, our youth director, Mr. Jared Crowley.
Hello, what's going on?
Oh, yeah.
Well, hey, it is Easter, and there's a lot of different things that are moving. The spring has sprung, and the weather is getting warmer, and people are out walking, and things are happening. I was kind of thinking this morning a little bit about this podcast, and I wanted to introduce maybe some of you to this quote that I think is really important and pertinent. And it goes like this. It says, "The history of humankind will probably show that no people has ever risen above its religion, and our spiritual history will positively demonstrate that no religion has ever been greater than its idea of God." That's a A.W. Tozer quote from Knowledge of the Holy. And I think it's a really interesting quote because it kind of unveils this principle of how influence works in our lives and the matter of importance that we give to certain things within our society. And as I think about society as a whole, I'm confronted by news of this past week where a person went into a Christian grade school and opened fire, shooting and killing 6 people, and then was shot and killed themselves. And I think and I know that we're in a society that is ripe for great change in the right direction. And I'm going to clue everybody in. That direction isn't political ideology. That direction isn't simply a technique within parenting. It's a giving over of ourselves to our greatest good, and that's God. And so there's this deep desire for God in our culture, but I feel like there's this a bit of floundering in how do we do that? You know, it's like we desire God and we know that that's the correct desire, but then how do we go about that? And so I kind of want to talk a little bit about that today because, you know, as a family ministries pastor, I think about society as a macroscopic reality, and then I think a little bit tighter into our general culture within maybe the Midwest, and then a little bit further in, and maybe the state of Kansas, and a little bit further in, and Olathe, and a little bit further in our church, and then a little bit further in, and our families, you guys, and parents and children, and all the amazing complexities that happen within that, and all of the beautiful opportunities that exist within even just the day-to-day, and just who you are as individuals and people. And we want to not just come alongside you in a podcast format or even just on a Sunday morning, but we want to come alongside you with practical resources via our parent engagement classes. We're going to be starting another one of those. We just got done with Dump the Drama with Dana Heston. She covered a 6-week course for us. It was brilliant, and she is amazing. We're going to be you'll be hearing a little bit more about this middle of April throughout May. I'll actually be teaching a 6-week course on parenting like God. And so we're going to be looking at building a biblical framework for parenting, and then how do we juxtapose that or synthesize that with our, on the ground reality. So we'll be talking a lot about grace and talking about, how do we do mercy well, and how do we do boundaries versus limitations, all these different concepts, and we'll be kind of diving into. But all of it is for the purpose of just coming alongside you guys as parents, and number one, making sure that the gospel's clear in your life. That that the declaration of God over Jesus, this is my son, whom I love, and with him I'm well pleased. That's the declaration over your life in Christ. You're not working for God's pleasure. You're working from God's pleasure. And I think it's super important, especially as we examine maybe our parenting. We put something under a microscope and we're like, God's not happy. There's no way God's happy with that. If I was God, I wouldn't be pleased. And it's like, no. we're not God and his ways are higher than our ways. And he's pleased with us in Christ. And then we get to work from that. So making sure that that's clear, number one. And then, what happens as that overflows through our lives, in our marriages, in our families, right? A little bit of a way that you can think about that is go and make disciples, right? Baptizing in the name of the Father and Son and Holy Spirit, right? Going into Jerusalem, Judea, and the surrounding areas. It's like, okay, Jerusalem's the mirror, right? Does the mirror know the gospel? Is that lived out with how I respond and reflect to myself and how God thinks about me in relationship to all the things that Jesus has provided for me? And then Judea would be my family, maybe my marriage, maybe more specifically. And then, to the ends of the earth, maybe that's my relationship with my kids, right? Do they know that God sees them that way because I see them that way, and doing that deep work? And so throughout all those pieces, it kind of begins to reverse engineer itself. And the one thing that I think is the most tricky, especially in a culture like ours, which is Johnson County, which is the spring, which is sports, which is, all of these school activities and all of the calendar getting filled up, is busyness. And we have, in a lot of respects, we have an unbent knee to the idol of busyness, but yet it still directs so much of our days. And prioritization becomes kind of difficult. And then things that aren't as ultimately important drive the practical day-to-day function, and it begins to impede on maybe what is a more ultimate necessity in human development. And I'll just make one contrast, and then we'll kind of get into frequency and the importance of frequency with both children and youth. But let's just make the easy one, sports. Okay, sports is an easy time suck, and you don't get to make the schedule. And, I learned a long time ago that, coaches on a Saturday will put out a schedule for a game early Sunday morning, and you got to make a hard call. Does something get to impede on your Sunday morning? Does that is that allowed? And so oftentimes it's like, well, yeah, it's allowed, because if my kid isn't at the game, then he loses his spot or she loses her spot, and that impacts where they're living as people. And it's like, I totally understand that. But at the same time, it's like those standards have to be set to what's most important. And the data's clear. The amount of D1 athletes that have committed suicide over the last year shows us that competitive sports is not the best platform to develop an adolescent identity, because it automatically imposes the necessity of comparison. Competitive sports is synonymous with comparison, and we know that one of the greatest distractions to calling and purpose is comparison. And comparison is the thief of joy. Like, we know all these tropes, we know all these things, but yet we're like, okay, competitive sports over church. And it's like, maybe we need to rethink that. So I want to talk to us today, and especially in this season, about how important is the frequency of your family at church, or your kids specifically. And so, Cynthia, I know you know a lot about how this affects our little bitty ones that are in the nursery, all the way up to our elementary age kiddos. And so what are some insights and maybe some helpful tips for families that might find themselves in a position where they've got to kind of compromise one way or the other?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I do want to speak and just share a little insight into our home about what Pastor Royce was just talking about. We decided long before kiddos what our boundaries would be on a Sunday morning, not really fully understanding what was going to come at us in terms of the requests for commitment at competitive levels, which almost all of our kids have played. Actually, all of them of an old enough age have played competitively. And
just for insight for everyone, because not everybody knows how many kids you have. How many kids are we talking about here that you and Adrian have?
We have 6 children.
Yeah, that's 6 kids, guys. Like, we're not talking about a 2-kid schedule like me. I know you think about me and you're like, yeah, Pastor Royce with his 2 kids, boo. Yeah, Cynthia has 6 like the rest of you guys who took the took the call to take dominion and multiply very seriously.
Yes.
So just so you guys know.
Yeah, so we decided that it would be important to make those decisions before the urgency of the call to do those things came. And so we set that boundary that Sunday mornings would be protected and provided, and we would graciously say our children won't participate on Sunday mornings. And really, it's been, I feel as God has honored and blessed that in so many ways. But we recently had a situation where we signed our youngest up for spring flag football, which, the Chiefs have won, so every kid's excited about football right now, right? But he played in the fall and wanted to play again. And we get the schedule, and all 6 games, every one of those games was on Sunday morning during church. And so we had to go to him and talk to him about that, explain why. And I'm so grateful that it was hard. My heart hurt for him wanting to play, and yet us talking to him about the whys, and then him graciously just going along with us. And I just know that God is going to honor that. But I empathize with the struggle for what if my kids left out? What if this? What if that? I believe our daddy, our ultimate daddy, is watching carefully over all of that. And as we seek him, will give us and our children the desires of our hearts as we align with him, as he promises in his word. So moving on to why that importance of the frequency, I get to walk alongside families within that birth to 3rd grade piece of our ministry. I absolutely love really all of them, all age groups, but that's just a fun, those are fun ages of just the wonder and awe in who God is. And they're really soaking up these truths. And as you know, and COVID probably did the worst thing for this age group of kids, is that their need to attach to caregivers is critical in those early ages. And so what we're tending to see with a lack of frequency in that 0 to, I'll say, 5 range, is that I don't know this person you're wanting to leave me in this room, because they're maybe here twice a month. Some are weekly, but they're here twice a month. And I don't want you to leave me because I don't feel secure here. And yet what I see over time is, as that frequency builds, that child begins to be attached and is valued and seen and heard, which are the high priority for us in our ministry. And that crying, that "don't leave me," starts to diminish over time. Yep. So I really want to encourage you to keep the frequency of your visits to church, your coming to church, or being a part of church, as frequent as possible, and also the time that you come being the same, so that your children can get to know those leaders. And really, we see ourselves as partners with you in that spiritual formation. And so again, that frequency piece of knowing what we're talking about week in and week out, and being able to reinforce those truths throughout the week, is just another way that they feel like we're in step with you. You know what we're talking about. You're talking about it with them during the week, and you're communicating your trust and faith and confidence in the leaders that you're dropping them off with week in and week out.
Yeah, and I want to just kind of attach something onto that, because I've talked to a lot of parents that just were super unaware of this. This isn't like something that they teach very commonly, but a child's subconscious is set entirely by the time they're 4 years old. And your subconscious is responsible for 95% of the decisions that you make. And so, to the point that Cynthia was making of going through the process of the uncomfortable space of that kid being with a safe caregiver that isn't just babysitting them, but we pray over your children in the nursery. We interact with them in extremely important ways. It not only sets the tone for them to be more resilient whenever they start to hit more socialization complications, which usually happens around middle school, and I'll explain why that is in a minute. But it empowers them subconsciously to appropriately respond as they get older. And so one of the things that is very clear, like data is very, very clear on this, that typically speaking, kids who suffer the most with social anxieties as they enter into middle school, and the reason entering into middle school is important is because it's really the first time that they're cognitively aware of a social change, and they're contemplating an overwhelming abundance of strangers. Because if you think about elementary school, when they were kindergartners, unless that kid's changed schools a few times, and the data's clear with those kiddos too, they're pretty resilient, but there's other issues. But they've been with the same group of people. They know those people. And so it really kind of peaks at 6th grade when there's new people that are introduced. And a lot of times that can be overwhelming. But what they found is kids who were left to cry a little bit longer, kids who were introduced to safe caregivers that weren't their parents through that 0 to 4 age range were much more resilient in those interactions and those opportunities that they came into in middle school. So it's really important that we have spaces, that you guys have spaces that you know that are safe for your kiddos to come into, and that can happen at a frequent pace, because it not only, again, is more of a conscious thing of just socialization specifically, but it's also more specific to how they develop to think about the church and the community that is the church and the kids that they grow up with, and how all of that kind of intersects one another to create a commitment to community that brings in a commitment to their calling.
Yes. And I will say, to add, in addition to that, as you hit those elementary ages, preschool, a little older preschool, and into those elementary ages, the ability, really at all ages, but specifically then when they're the expressions of themselves in new situations, or if they're not in them very often, particularly those kids with leadership traits that are unregenerated at this point, are the ability for the leadership in those settings to build connection leads to their ability to influence and really draw out of that child their potential. And without that connection, that child doesn't receive that. So if you think of it as equity, to be able to influence what I get to put in on a Sunday morning as a leader, which is why they're there. They want to pour in and connect with your child. They have a deep desire to be a part of the spiritual formation of this next generation. But the way that it can be done most effectively is through their equity that they're building with that child week in and week out. And so that's another reason for that importance of that frequency.
Yeah, one of the things that we've always been really clear about, and I want to say this because I don't want you to get the wrong idea that you should just force your kids to go to church. That is not the idea here. One of the things that we have always done as a family, me and my wife, was we told our 2 daughters, and we told them, I'm never going to make you go to church. But if you don't want to go to church, we're going to have a conversation as to why. And I've never had a weekend where my kids weren't looking forward to church sometimes more than I was. And that being said, we're here both services. Over a decade, my family has been at Church of the Harvest for all the services, so multiple services a week, or on Sunday more specifically. And what that turned into was, and we're having an issue right now with my youngest because she's in 4th grade and she's chomping at the bits to serve. Like, she wants to serve with preschool, and we're as an organization, we're not really comfortable with 4th and 5th graders serving younger students at that point. We really reserve that for our middle schoolers and up. But that just kind of goes to show, my oldest started serving in the nursery when she started middle school. So she's 11, 12 years old, and we have stipulations around what they're able to do in that space. They can't pick up the babies and things like that, but she was able to be around those kids. And that because if you have a 4 or 5-year-old right now, they know Chloe. And they know Chloe because they were there. If they were in the nursery with her, then they have some bit of a bond with her through that. And she's a safe person for them. And so that came from not just we're going to have a conversation if you don't want to go to church, but they want to go to church and they want to stay at church and they want to not just consume at church, but they also want to be a part of serving at church. And as parents, the way that we navigated that was, we want you to be involved with that which is aligned to your purpose. So it wasn't, okay, Chloe, just go be with babies because we have need for someone to be with babies. It was, where do you feel your heart drawing you to? And where do you feel the Lord's calling you to? And that's what created that. But I find it kind of interesting because sometimes we'll have people who join the Family Ministries team and they're like, well, my kids are going to be here both services. And I have to tell them, like, yeah, in my experience, as long as this is handled correctly, that goes beautifully in creating a connectivity and really a deep community. And we have there's a significant depth of community within our team kids, essentially, that get to kind of serve here. And so the frequency seems to, and by my experience and also by my observation, it creates as long as it's preceded with that, I'm not going to make you. This isn't a forceful thing. This is a conversation that we're going to have. And we might not land at you want to go to church. But we might find out some things that can help us get there. And then that creates an amazing sense of purpose within those kiddos. But speaking of all that, I think this is somewhat ironic because here with us today, we have the fruit and the product of a couple of decades of what we're talking about and all of the frequencies from being a little kid that came every week and played with Spider-Man toys that he snuck in, to children's service, to being a rebellious teenager that almost put me to death a few times.
I don't know if consistency and frequency are the best ways to describe
it's fun because
tenure at Church of the Harvest.
It gives us the full perspective. We have Jared Crowley, who's our youth director, and he's joining us today on the podcast. He'll be a frequented voice. And so I kind of want to talk to Jared about the kids that are a little bit older. And so before I do that, though, I want to speak to one specific area because as we look at the whole of Family Ministries, or really just dedication to graduation, nursery to the essentially the diploma and going to college or going into young adulthood, there was some constants that were really important to understand as we did what we do with adolescent development. And that was, for the longest period of time, probably about 2006 till roughly 2018, if you were going to really capture the heart of a student, that was going to happen in 6th to 7th grade. So that middle school time frame, that was really when kids made personal decisions for Jesus. It's really when they started to understand what it was like for them to follow Jesus and submit their life to God. And what we found is that, especially post-COVID, but this started a little bit before COVID, that because of information frequency, that age range has actually shifted down. And here at Church of the Harvest, we have the grace and the gift to be able to provide a preteen specific environment, which means, as Cynthia pointed out, we have elementary stops at 3rd grade, and then preteen starts at 4th grade, and it's 4th grade and 5th grade. And that's super important structurally because if you think about a kindergartner starting out in an environment with a group of people, by the time they get to 5th grade, if that's all consistent, they get bored quick. And by the time they're in 5th grade, they're checked out of church. Pretty much. I mean, that's brutal in a way. And so, but it's also hard because not a lot of churches have the opportunity with enough volunteers to be able to provide a preteen environment. And so because we have an amazing team of individuals, we're able to provide that preteen environment. And as the Family Ministries pastor, that to me is the most important environment that we have at Church of the Harvest. So that's where we put our best people. That's where we push to frequency and community, and we're just kind of on the front end of all of that stuff, but it is the most important time frame. And so we have a great group of individuals that are doing that, and we're so grateful that we can provide that, number one, but also two, that they are the quality of individuals that they are. And so as we move up the rung, we get into some middle school and some high school, different complications, different things. You got different conversations that are happening. They become way less compliant, typically speaking. That's not always, but typically they become much more opinionated. They may have their own perspectives and views. And So we want to make sure that we're able to speak to all the situations. And I think Jared's situation is unique. Because what was that like for you, Jared, like as a middle school kid and then as a high school kid?
Yeah, so around the conversation of frequency and consistency, I think, you guys really hit like the importance of showing up consistently and how kids end up relating to their leaders and how they end up relating to church and different things like that. But for me, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but that middle school period for me, I was super consistent and like probably the most involved youth kid. That was right around the time we had, I went through 2 youth group pastor changes, I think in like 3 years. So it was like kind of a weird thing, but the one that ended up staying for a while, I actually like got super close to in that season, and was kind of just like, open and ready for like that type of relationship in my life. And then, sort of going into high school, a lot of things you're saying about being opinionated and not being compliant and having your own ideas, definitely started to, rear its ugly head around that time. And so I was probably attending like once a month. It was basically just whenever I felt like it. But it's so interesting now because I hit this point probably 2-3 years ago, where, the pandemic, it did this for a lot of people. So this isn't necessarily a unique experience, but it really shook up like all my friendships and my relationships, and really like showed me who was actually dedicated to doing life with me and who was just kind of there because I was there. And then what relationships relied on us seeing each other in person frequently, or what relationships could exist, just keeping up with each other once a month or things like that. And so it really made me look at all the different friend groups that I had sort of like available to me and all the different options, so to speak. And really the only one that made any sense were the people that I was connected to in high school through church. And it's kind of interesting because that friend group doesn't look exactly the way it looked in high school. There's some dropouts and some team changes and different things like that. But yeah, it just like, it was super weird to me at first, but then makes a lot of sense now that even as inconsistent as I was, really the most important thing for me, or what's ended up being the most important thing for me from that period of my life, were the friendships that I was making. And so when we're talking about consistency and frequency and showing up and stuff like that, it's not just for their opinion of church, right, or their opinion of church leaders. It's also the community that they build that they might not even really see the fruit of until they're in their early 20s. Because a lot of the people that I was the closest to when I was coming to youth group were not the people that I'm the closest to now, both in the church and out of the church. Because even the relationships that I was building at youth group, those same people aren't the people that I'm like super close to. It was the people that, hey, how you doing? Oh yeah, okay, cool, see you later, and now they're like my best friends, which is so weird because we didn't spend that much time together. But that amount of consistency was still, God was able to use it in such a fruitful way, right?
Right. Yeah, no, I think reflecting on your experience, that really the knitting of the formation of that community, and that's what's so important, especially and pretty much everybody knows this, but maybe not everybody knows this. As kids age into young adolescence, into teenage years, their influencers change significantly. So they become, and this is correct, right? So this isn't inappropriate in any way, but they tribalize around middle school. So they're trying to fit in and find their people. And when that happens, peers become much more influential sometimes than parents. And so you kind of get this beginnings of the formation of the individual that is the person that they'll grow up to be. And during that middle school time frame especially, that's when that community is really knit together, even if it's from their perspective in middle school a peripheral thing, right? Because those relationships over that period of time, middle school to high school, and we have to remember, like, we're a church, we're not a school. And so the community aspect is different because of frequency, number one. But then number two, there's a moment where that child becomes conscious in their personal commitment. And it's usually the commitment to the community first. It's not the commitment to the entertainment. It's not the commitment to the content or the preaching. It's usually the commitment to the community.
Yeah.
And then over time, that community, because this is kind of the funny thing, it's like if you had to name how many high school friends you kept around into your early 20s or mid 20s or even early 30s, it's very small. But that's not true of communities with like church communities. You keep those communities last longer. And in my estimation, they're much more finalized, because say you have a group of friends from band, like you were in band, you played drums, you're in drum corps, and those people were really close to you. That was something you were excited about and interested in. And then when you got older, obviously that performance-based thing falls off. And because that community is built around that performance-based thing, that community falls by the wayside too, because it's what was the glue.
Yeah, for sure.
So when God's the glue,
Right.
that doesn't change.
Yeah.
Right? And I've even seen people go through crises of faith and stay committed to those communities in ways that were like really, really, really important for them. I have a friend who has been struggling with significant mental health issues for over a decade, and just on the other side of it now. But one of the things that kept them grounded was the community that we had.
Yeah.
And the consistency of a voice. They don't go to church with me, but there was a long period of time where they just didn't go to church at all, had a lot of questions, a lot of deep existential questions. And it was like, okay, like that commitment had moved all around, but because we had community, then we could come to these real strong conclusions that they're in a really solid place now. And so it can be massively life-changing. And if we think that socially that we are not in a place of adolescent development and that importance, spiritual development importance being at the forefront of everything we do, I don't think we're paying attention at all.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's not going to be on these comparative-based things. It's not going to be on academic things. And look, you guys, like we're coming up on 2024. What happens in 2024 that's just shattering to our culture? Primary elections. And I don't care what you say, there is a line of people replacing religious or spiritual ideology with political ideology. And you're going to see it explode over the next 18 months. And it's like, okay, there's a massive importance of the spiritual development of our kids and of our students and of ourselves. And understanding the clarity of the gospel, that doesn't become less important as they become middle schoolers. It becomes more important as they become middle schoolers. It doesn't become less important as they become high schoolers. It becomes more important as they become high schoolers. And so, I've always been a fan of, let's understand some things. Church of the Harvest, we're not a social club. I don't do youth ministry as a focus of entertainment. I'm not going to stand in front of God and be asked, how well did you entertain teenagers in Olathe, Kansas throughout the season of life that I gave you? I'm going to be held accountable to how I discipled. And so we always try to strike the balance between giving them engageable opportunities that allow them to develop relationships with each other and discipleship. So it's entertaining, but it's also we're about what we're about, and what we're about is discipleship. The other side to that coin is too, like we don't stress a lot of importance on production. We stress a lot of importance on interpersonal relationships. And so I think that production values, especially among teenagers, I'm talking about youth now, a lot of that, if you really boil it down, it's a lot of used to be romanticized and emotional manipulation, because teenagers are also hyper emotional, and that's a huge trap, because what it does is it starts students off from the foot that faith is synonymous with feeling, and faith is not a feeling. Faith isn't removed from feelings, so please don't hear me say that. But I've seen too many young adults mature. God is maturing them in their faith.
Yeah.
And therefore they feel it less. And that's a season of maturity, and people mistake that for God left.
Yep.
Because I synonymize God with a feeling.
For sure. Yeah.
And so we lean away from that. And which means that your student might be like, well, worship isn't, a Maverick City concert. And yeah, hey, parents, love you guys. If you guys want to give me a Maverick City budget, I'll produce a Maverick City concert, right, for them every single week. But that's isn't what's important. It's not, the production isn't important. The interpersonal relationship is important. And so that's really what carries for that age group of kiddos. And so this is something that I'll just kind of leave you guys with on a practical note. If you have a middle schooler, if you have a high schooler, if you have younger kiddos, it's the conversation of, I'm not going to ever make you go to church, but let's talk about why you don't want to go if you want to go. And push back on their ideas. I hate that I have to say this, but I feel like I have to say this. You are your kid's parent. Your kid and their obsession with Fortnite does not dictate your household. That's not appropriate. So if your kid doesn't want to go to church, and the reason that they don't want to go to church is because they'd rather do something entertaining or that they consider entertaining instead, you have to step up as the parent. We have too many 25-year-olds that sit in their parents' basement playing video games with the dream of being a YouTuber, and they don't even have a camera, and they're purposeless. And the rate of suicide within young men is very, very high. And the rate of depression and purposelessness is even higher. It's a major issue. And that happens, the balance to that, the counter to that, is when we parent our children and we say, this isn't appropriate, or you're putting the wrong emphasis in the wrong place. So we have to parent people and navigate them through that conversation, but have that conversation and push back on those things. Set those boundaries. For us, it was always, if, my oldest daughter does high-level cheer, and if cheer impedes on Sunday, church wins. That's just it. There's no in between on that. And that's been driven by her at this point in life. She's going to be 16 this summer, and she tells her coaches, I have church on Sunday, because she shows up for babies, and that's important to her. But that started with, this is the commitment that we're making. These are the boundaries that we have as a family, and this is what we're going to commit to and do. And then with your older kiddos, it's just about, really the fruit of all that in a way, but allowing that space. And this is where I kind of land with the older kiddos. Give them 2 months, make them commit for 2 months. And there's a very significant reason why that's true. It takes, for us as a team, as individuals, it takes us 2 months to not become strangers anymore. We have to have 2 months with a kid for them to erode that kind of stranger danger and to get to a place where they're actually going to have a conversation with us, more or less the rest of the people that are in that room that they may not go to school with and they may only see on Sunday, and probably most of them they only see on Sunday. And so it takes at least 2 months to build that trust that will allow them to build that community. Super true of teenagers. And so, talk to them. What'd you like? What did you not like? Push back on their feedback. Is it more about entertainment and production, or is it more about interpersonal relationship and discipleship? Right? Because let's appropriate. If I go to Walmart and I ask a person in a blue vest where an item is, they should be able to answer that question. Why? Because I'm at the Walmart and they work at Walmart. Walmart's for a specific thing and their employees are for a specific thing. We're a church. We're for a specific thing. That's growing children in their spiritual development and their discipleship. That's what we're here for. So, push back on those kinds of things. You might be in this position where you want to come along and help. More than happy to have you come along with our middle school, high school teams. I'm super happy to have you, but that 2 month commitment, because here's the bottom line. It takes at least 2 months. If everything goes smooth, it takes 2 months to build a genuine interpersonal relationship with a student. It takes 2 weeks to lose it entirely. You go back into being a stranger, and that person won't relate to you. You have to start over again with another 2 month cycle. It's really hard. That's a very real reality, and it makes it kind of difficult, because if that bond isn't kept, then it's easily lost. And kids, life's hitting them really hard. Stuff happens fast, especially as teenagers. And so you might get some pushback on that, but that's why we're here. We're here to come alongside you and help you. We're here to provide the spaces. We very carefully craft the way that we do what we do, so that we can kind of get everybody on the same page. And so I'll kind of end with that, and then we'll talk to you next time. But the way that we structure everything within Family Ministries is on a Sunday. It's on Sundays, and we do that because midweek stuff impedes, especially as kids get older. It impedes with their homework and their schedules. And so we do everything on Sundays for a reason, and that means middle school and down is done on Sunday mornings. And so we have teams of people in every environment. That's nursery, preschool, elementary, preteen, middle school on Sunday mornings. We also do that because middle schoolers can't drive. And so we do something a little bit later in the day. There's usually less of them that are able to build those bonds and connectivity because parents have to drive them, and then we're complicating more than just a couple people's schedules. We're complicating, you, your wife, or you, your husband, and that child's schedule. And so we do all of that on Sunday mornings. And then on Sunday evenings, we have semester systems. And so our semester systems run essentially January through the end of April, June and July, and then September through November, right till Thanksgiving, the weekend before Thanksgiving. Those are our high school service schedules. And so our high school services are on Sunday evenings from 6 to 8. Middle schoolers are invited to that. They're welcome there. That service isn't directly for them, though. It's for our high schoolers. But we know that sometimes those middle schoolers want an extra little bit, and so we input that and we allow them to be there, love to have them there. But that service is specifically built for our high school students, and they're able to come and play for a while up till we go into worship, and then we go into worship, and then someone preaches for 20 to 25 minute period of time, and then we do small groups and we break out from there, and pick up for that is at 8 o'clock. We're going to be introducing as well, more than likely. I've got to kind of get some consensus on this, but over the summer I can get some more time with the kiddos, and so I usually like to go through a Bible study with them, and that's what that is. It's a Bible study. But it's very important because it gives more frequency to the people at church. And so that's really the underpinning of what it does, is it really serves. Like, if you want your teenager to genuinely grow in community at church, them being a part of that Bible study and a part of the youth group is insanely important, especially over the summer period. So lock that in if you're able to. If you're not, and it's complicated, shoot me an email, royce.walker@churchoftheharvest.org. I'll be more than happy to help you guys, and appreciate your time. Guys, thank you guys so much for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.